This is a conversation with Inge Sengelmann. Hi, Inge.
Hello.
So, just before we started recording, you were sharing with me something about your parents' visit.
Yes.
Is it okay maybe to just start from that, talk a little bit about it, and then...
Sure. So you want me to just tell you again what that experience was like and trying to dialogue with them about spirituality?
Yeah.
So as I was saying, my mother and father became born-again Christian, maybe 20 years ago or so. And so they go to an evangelical church and they read the Bible every day. And so I think because they know that my beliefs are different, they get concerned, I guess, about the status of my soul and my salvation. So as they were here, I noticed that they kept reading their Bible verses out loud and trying to convince me of their views. And I was, in a way, trying to really honor their belief system and not try to contradict it or argue with them, to not make it adversarial, I guess, is what I was trying to do, while at the same time trying to express to them that that I believe in applying the theories, whether they are the teachings of Jesus Christ or the teachings of the Buddha. I personally practice a tantric yogic. I'm part of a lineage that is tantric yoga, and so it is much more about embodying the light and shining the light and expressing the light within, more than talking about it. So it's not an intellectual. So my spiritual life and my spiritual practices are about enabling me to really embody what the tradition teaches.
Yeah.
I do really strongly feel that Jesus was a master, and that I do believe, I guess, and practice with what Jesus taught. And so I was trying to tell them this, that I may not talk about Jesus Christ in the way that they do, or the Christ, but that my understanding is a little different and broader. And it was very difficult for them to wrap themselves around that. And, but it allowed us to have a conversation that wasn't adversarial or conflictive, which I wanted to avoid, because that would then, in my book, not be in accordance to my values, and it would not be in accordance to what I consider spirituality. And so I wanted to honor where they were at.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at the same time, noticing that my father is filled with fear. And so I was asking him how he experienced his belief, because if he truly believed what he said he believed, he would not be as afraid. And he agreed. And my mother is more disconnected and dissociated, and so she kind of didn't participate so much in the discussions. But anyway, it was just interesting. I don't know where to go from there.
No, that feels very beautiful and very rich. And maybe I'm going to try and pick up a few strands. You say you don't know who go from there, but my sense of it is it's hard to go from there simply because there's such a richness of possibilities of where to go.
Sure.
So maybe if I pick up a few, you can see where you're drawn to going.
Okay.
So one of them is the idea that it's so easy when talking about this type of issues to find yourself at loggerhead with people in a way where it's like, yeah, but, and there's an argument and there's a blocked quality to it, and you were very conscious of wanting to avoid that and of finding a way to build bridges in order to find some similarities or to find ways of talking about what is important to you in such a way that it could create a bridge as opposed to creating more of a chasm and an argument.
Exactly.
So that was one area. Another strand that I saw was very powerful was you're talking about the practice and that, that you recognize the existence of masters, enlightened people, and had something to contribute that is of great value, and that the way that you want to not just honor them, and it's not so much on honoring them, but derive the benefit of it in your life, is by understanding and practicing what they have taught in your own life, in an embodied way, in the texture of your everyday life, as opposed to talking about it.
Exactly.
And another strand that I got is by, just in this conversation with your parents, it's also very clear of how, these things are related to our emotional states, or, the experiences themselves, the belief systems, and the way of talking about it. And you mentioned the dichotomy between your father's belief system and his fears. Mm-hmm. And, in a way, even further in the continuum, the fact that for your mother there is a disconnection that makes it even difficult to examine what, the belief system or the emotional system are.
Exactly.
So all of this feels very rich, and is of course the dimension of something people close to you, your family, your parents, and the difficulty for well-meaning people.
Yes.
To have, some kind of a meaningful exchange about something that is so meaningful to both your parents and you. But, in a way it's emblematic of, in our society at large, why we have so many conflicts around these issues. So much meaning, but so difficult to come together on that.
Exactly. And that's why, for me to live my practice is to avoid conflict but not run away.
Yes.
Not avoid it by avoiding the conversation, but avoid conflict by being respectful and staying conscious and managing my own agitation when I was confronted with, belief systems that are to me not helpful. Like you are a damaged human being that can't save yourself, that those kinds of beliefs. So honoring that this is a system of belief that really brings them comfort, while also still being able to express to the best of my ability in a way that they could comprehend what I believe and how I experience my beliefs and how I practice and live them, because that's really, and of the three strands, I think the one that is most interesting is the middle one, the one about living and embodying the contributions of all masters, but really living them as opposed to becoming, entrenched in a rigid, closed belief system that then brings me into conflicts with other human beings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in other words, both in terms of interest, so it's going to be interesting, we're going to talk more about the living, these teachings, in your life. But you make also the point that when you're in the mode of living them, then there's going to be less of a tendency to be in a conflict, in a contradiction with other people, because it's going to be more, there's something about living them that's not about the ideas and conflicting. It's how you live them.
Yes, and in a way, it's interesting how things are flowing as we converse, because it's clarifying in my mind a way of expressing it, because what I experience in really listening to them is that, in fact, we don't contradict each other. It is the concepts and the language that makes us contradict each other. That at their essence, underneath it all, we're all in agreement. We just have and this is kind of where we came to, even though I don't know that my dad fully took that in, but my husband and I, because my husband was here too, and we sort of explained to him, we said, I think we actually agree. We just have a different language for verbalizing what you're saying. A language that is informed by other traditions, not just the Christian tradition, and a language that is a little broader and maybe, I don't know, beyond concepts, more experiential.
Yeah. And I noticed, by the way, just a few minutes ago when you were talking about your parents, and you said it's the belief system that brings them comfort. I respect this belief system that brings them comfort. So literally, you were describing it in a sense of what sustains me.
Yes.
So in a way, there's that part to say, okay, so there's a belief system. We can each have a belief system, and that belief system, its function is to sustain us. So you put it in that framework of the daily life, because when you say a belief system that brings some comfort, the reason for doing it is about the comfort, is about the, what happens in your daily life, as opposed to I'm practicing this belief system because it's right, or because, the true God or the true book or the true prophet said that's what we should practice.
Exactly. I mean, they will use that language that you just used. However, what allowed me to have compassion is to really see that, this almost brings tears.
Yeah. So let's stay there. Let's make space for the tears.
Is that I know that they each have a big trauma load. That they haven't had the benefit of the gift of SC and other healing that I've experienced. So they need that to sustain them, to keep them going, to give them a framework. And so that's when I could really see that, I thought, I don't need to argue with them, and I don't need to take away what they believe, because it is what sustains them. It is what allows them to function, given that they are still so traumatized, I mean, my father's fears are driven by the fact that he, he's German, even though he was born in Nicaragua, of German parents. His father was at war, went to war in World War I. Who then we went through a revolution in Nicaragua, and they lost everything, and he had to defend his property, his family with guns. So he still has guns. He's 78 years old, and he still has an arsenal of guns at home. And so, I totally understand that he needs that in the way that he is able to experience it. And my mother needs it too in her own way. She doesn't want to embody. She wants to be on the other side. And so her hope is she can't wait to be taken away from this earth by Jesus Christ, and that's what allows her to live on this planet, is Jesus is going to come and take me away in the rapture, and I can't wait, And so how can I take this away from them, And so it allows me to not get into conflicted conversations, because I see that I just have a more of a bird's eye view, and I can accept that they don't understand that I believe differently, and that something different sustains me, But they don't have to understand it.
So what is very clear as you're describing it this way, this bird's eye view that you mentioned, is that you're not just listening to the debate in terms of ideas, concepts, whatever it is, but you are putting it in the context of, oh, what is this person's life?
Yes.
And in that broader context of not just, being caught on ideas in this person's life, and you look at your father's life, for instance, and not just your father, but, where he's coming from, this intergenerational trauma and story. And you say, where he's coming from, there was this and there was that. No wonder he would feel this way.
Yeah.
Okay? And you look at your mother and you say, no wonder she would feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the compassion.
Yeah.
And it's not about looking at ideas as if they were the most important, but you're looking at the person and you have that compassionate view of their situation as a whole.
Yeah. The compassion and the interconnectedness that, we're all in the same boat. We're all trying to make sense and make meaning and look for what sustains us. And so we're all the same, and it's funny because my husband is a little more concrete than I am, but he put it this way. He said, he said to my dad, he said, Peter, we don't disagree. We're all just human beings trying to be happy, in whatever way we can find to make that happen. So it was, it was really, really lovely.
So where are you emotionally as we talk about these things right now?
I'm experiencing a gentleness, a sweetness. There's still some water in my eyes. And, but a kind of a settling of like things coalescing, of making sense of this past week. They just left on Wednesday and we had a week together in which this came up quite a lot. And at the same time, I had an extreme relief when I put them in the airplane, because I was like, I just don't want to be quoted the Bible anymore. It's one thing, to welcome things that are invited, but when they're not invited, it's like, okay, enough.
Right. And so you have this hand gesture of pushing, enough, but so very much the opposite of the invasion. And so there's something about that sense that, the opposite of the compassionate perspective of saying, this is where this person is from, I can, try to understand there and be with, there's like the force feeding of belief.
Yeah. That's definitely something that I try not to do, which is why, I tend to practice more than preach, because again, it just seems like trying to put words to experiences or try to use a lingo, There's a lingo in my tradition. There's a lot of Sanskrit and there's a lot of, scriptures that I could quote to them, and I don't, because it just would, it's interesting from this SE perspective, or this spiritual perspective of connecting, the theme of connecting, it would disconnect for me to try to talk to them from my tradition.
Right.
In that lingo. It would not create connection, it would create disconnection.
And so it's interesting because we're going to talk about practice, but in a way, even if we don't say anything more about practice, you've already given a very beautiful example of practice, in the way you approached discussing this with your parents.
Yeah.
And it was about figuring out, that just your way of seeing them where they are and connecting where they are.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But so maybe let's bring it more to other ways. Either I'm not sure where it feels right for you to go from there. We said we would go talk about practice. So is it about how you got to, this outlook and this practice, or is this more about how you practice in your everyday life, or what comes up for you if we want to talk a little bit about practicing in your life?
It's so interesting because it really is it brings up emotion, definitely, because I have such gratitude to how I came to where I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I think where it feels right to go is to give you an anecdote, a very recent anecdote of this current tradition that I'm in and how I got to it. And so in February, I was in Minnesota for a training with my teacher, and he began to speak about Sri Vidya. And Sri Vidya is this tantric lineage, is the lineage of Sri Vidya. And Sri Vidya meaning the highest wisdom. It really represents the Divine Mother. And so as he began to speak, and here we are, it was like minus something degrees. It was like snow all over the place. And we're inside this warm room, and he begins to speak. And I'm this girl from Nicaragua, from tropical Nicaragua, and somehow I'm in Minnesota. And he begins to speak about Sri Vidya, and it's like my heart just totally like exploded with joy. And I just started to cry.
Mm.
And I couldn't stop crying.
Yeah.
And it was just so. And so as he kept speaking, because he's just now starting to speak more about the deeper esoteric practices of Sri Vidya, and so he was treading lightly himself, and my heart just kept going, please say more, say more, say more. But what I got the sense of is how this hand of the Divine Mother had held me throughout my life, that I began to see the threads of how I went from a 12-year-old learning mantra meditation in Nicaragua and having an experience of oneness, and the difficulty that I had embodying after that, because I had no guidance and no teacher and nothing. And how I struggled with this embodiment for so long, and how then I landed in body work type treatments to begin to heal, and body-centered psychotherapy, and how I couldn't meditate because it would take me somewhere out here, and I started to meditate more in here, and to eventually landing with this teacher that then led me to this other teacher. And so I just saw the thread of connection, and I just felt this sense of protection from this Divine Mother, creator, whatever you want to call it. And I also was laughing about how interesting that I land in a divine feminine tradition. Because I so needed a mother, And so it was just this beautiful experience. And so the tradition basically is about doing practices that light the inner fire of illumination so that we can get to experience and know this Divine Mother.
And so that experience you're describing at that moment is that intense emotion, this the being really deeply moved and deeply grateful, and seeing all the strands and different perspective, because it can be just remembering your childhood, remembering the yearning to find meaning through practices, but also remembering the disconnectedness, but also making, the psychological part about, say, oh yeah, I needed a mother, and this happens to be a mother tradition.
Yeah.
And you can see all these different perspectives almost at the same time.
Yeah.
And there's a container for them with that
Yeah.
intense emotion.
Yeah. There definitely is a container in the sense that now my body is a container that's pretty solid and regulated for the most part. And there was the container of the Sangha, of the community that we were in. We were in a deeply held container, the container of the teacher, but also the greater container, just the universal container just really felt very, very powerful. And I also saw how, because I moved through Christianity, I moved through Buddhism, and I eventually landed in this tradition, which is a yoga tradition. So there are body practices. The body is the gateway,
Mm-hmm.
to these experiences. And the body is a sacred temple in this tradition. So earlier in my life, it was all about disowning the body,
Mm-hmm.
and disowning this bodily earthly experience. And that didn't really work for me. I mean, I wanted to escape it, but it also didn't work as far as functioning fully in this world. So it's just, all fascinating to me. And so, I mean, I really see the connection too between somatic experiencing and what I do spiritually. So it's very powerful.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah.
So that's why I was so drawn to even just the words embodied spirituality, because I've been talking about that for years now, about how I practice and endorse an embodied spirituality as opposed to a conceptual or out of body spirituality,
Yeah, yeah.
Just because, and in Tantra, Tantra really means that we can be fully spiritual and fully human at the same time. And that in order to be, you have to bring those two together to really be successful in not only growing spiritually, but also we can be successful in the world. It's not contradictory to spiritual growth,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, having had that practice of being disembodied and having the practice of being embodied, how would you describe the experiences? Of course, it's a little bit difficult to find words for these things, but to the extent that we can.
Let me think for a moment. Well, I guess I could say that as long as I was disembodied, I couldn't know myself, myself in all levels of myself, my little self, my body self, my ego self, my identity, my personality, and as well as my greater self, that part that is connected to everything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so when I was disembodied, I experienced all sorts of problems with addiction and eating disorders and depression and anxiety and interpersonal, instability. And the interesting part is, and I will say that this is something that sustains me and gives me a lot of comfort is knowing that there was always an inner teacher.
Mm-hmm.
There was always something guiding me to the next helpful thing. Because no one outside of me was telling me, go here, do that, pursue this, or, heal this way. I mean, there might have been, once I started to connect to that guidance, there might have been a person that showed up and said, you might want to try this body worker, And then I went to the body worker, and then that led to something else. And eventually that led to my training in somatic experience, because I healed through the body. And so when I became a practitioner, a therapist, I said, I need to be trained in a body oriented modality, because that's what I believe in. That's what worked for me. And so then I was guided to somatic experiencing, and then I finally started doing yoga eventually. Because I used to be an over-exerciser, and so I didn't want to waste time doing those yoga poses, And eventually I landed with a teacher that I just loved her inner shininess, She was half as young as I. She was a young woman. And yet she had this grounded, embodied, shiny self, and very compassionate, non-judgmental. And she started to help me and teach me. And I wanted to deepen my meditation practice. Because I had had that experience at 12 or 13 that led me through such a struggle. I didn't want to meditate in a way that took me out of myself, and so I was always kind of fighting meditating. And, through her, I met her teacher and, had some powerful meditation experiences and decided to become part of that tradition and really deepen my meditation and in that sense. And yeah, so that's it, being embodied. I mean, and open to everything, not rejecting anything,
Yeah.
Even those internal experiences that I'm averse to. You know how it is. It just flows and regulates so perfectly and wisely that I don't have to avoid anything. So that allows me to then be present. That allowed me to be present with my parents and not go into that constriction of like, I gotta fight what they're telling me. Because it creates discomfort in me. So by being open to my discomfort, I was able to go into softness and regulation instead of fighting the discomfort by avoiding it. And then it allowed something else to flow, which I believe is love or, life. Yeah.
So that's saying that just in a way, we're circling back to the experience with your parents, because that's something you have shared. So we have in common as a moment. And you're saying that in a previous state of being more disembodied, you would not have been in touch with that discomfort, which would then have brought to more constriction, more avoidance, and more fighting.
Yeah.
And being aware of it at an embodied level, being able to feel that beginning of constriction, gave us a possibility of actually kind of not fight it and open up. And, the opposite of constraining the opening up is finding that love that comes from opening up, and being able to make the connection.
Yes. In a natural, organic, flowing way, as opposed to, again, a mental thing of, you have to be nice to them. You want to, more, it's more like, I can be nice to them. I can be accepting. I can be loving. And, so being embodied is just awesome.
Yeah, no, but that was a very beautiful example of showing the difference between acting from a moral should or an abstract should, and that sequence of experiences.
Yeah.
Once you're able to actually feel that tightening
Yeah.
about, the discomfort, the invasion, and then kind of that settling down and that opening.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is a way of practicing and living.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And making the world a better place.
Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, this is probably one in a series of conversations we're going to have about this topic as you work on, what you're going to write. So if it feels right to stop here for a moment, maybe what could we bookmark it with for the time being?
What could we bookmark this like? Well, the words that come to my mind is what an important thread of conversation. Yeah. What a lovely thing to bring out into the world. These conversations that you want to have with people and seeing what we can contribute, of our own experience that might be helpful to humanity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is part of the Active Pause podcast at activepause.com.